The interest payment was due in 11 days, and I had nothing set aside for it. This was fall of 2004. I was 44 years old and 3 properties into a $600,000 line of credit from Sierra National Bank in Reno. The warehouse in Sparks was empty. The strip mall in Carson City hadn't moved. I kept telling myself both problems were temporary, which was useful because the bank didn't accept optimism as payment. I called myself a one-man empire back then. It sounded better than small-time developer, and nobody was around to correct me. The swagger was the only thing I had left that didn't cost money. That afternoon, I was at the apartment with the commercial property sheet spread across the kitchen table. I had a calculator beside it and 3 months of bank statements under one hand. Most of the listings were useless. Retail space with bad parking. Industrial buildings priced like they were still making money. A few vacant lots where the seller had confused a view of the mountains with an actual business plan. Then I saw Starlight Lanes. The listing was 4 lines long. Bowling alley on Old US 40 west of Sparks, asking $48,000. Serious buyers only. Daytime showings. That was it. I read it again because listings that cheap usually came with a reason, and sometimes the reason was still cheaper than the property. I pulled the Washoe County parcel records and checked the lot. The land alone was assessed at just over $500,000. The building could be worthless. The roof could be failing. The plumbing could be copper stripped down to the walls. I didn't care. Land alone was worth $500,000. The difference between $48,000 and $500,000 was the kind of difference that made people overlook a lot of problems. I picked up the phone and called the number at the bottom of the listing. A man answered on the first ring. Starlight Lanes. Hi, I'm calling about the property. There was a pause, not a long one. You're a buyer? I'm a serious buyer, I said. I want to see it today. Another pause. I could hear something faint on his end. A television maybe, or a fan. Afternoon, he said. That works. Come out Old US 40, west of Sparks. I know where it is. Meet me there. What's your name? Orion Morgan. He said it like the answer was enough. I wrote it down on the corner of the property sheet anyway. What kind of condition is the building in? I asked. Been closed. For how long? He didn't answer that. I could hear the faint sound again. Something turning, maybe the fan. We need to be out of the building before dusk, he said. I looked at the clock on the microwave. There was still plenty of afternoon left. All right. Before the lights come on by themselves. I waited for him to explain. He didn't. You're the owner? Yes. Okay, I'll see you there. We need to be out of the building before dusk, before the lights come on by themselves. Then he hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand for a few seconds. I wasn't going to ask because I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer, and the answer didn't affect the land value. The building was a concrete rectangle on a $500,000 parcel. That was the part that mattered. I wrote the address on the back of a gas receipt and folded the property sheet in half. The calculator stayed on the table beside the bank statements. My Silverado was parked in the lot with a film of dust across the hood. It was a 1999 Chevrolet, the kind of truck that looked more reliable than the person driving it. I put the receipt on the dashboard and started the engine. Reno was already turning cold in the late afternoon. The sun had that thin fall look to it, bright without giving off much heat. I pulled onto the interstate and headed north toward Sparks. The numbers started before I reached the next exit. If the building was around 200 feet long and the lanes were still usable, I could divide the space into storage units. No windows meant fewer problems. Concrete construction meant the walls were already there. I figured construction cost per square foot, then monthly rent per unit, then what 60% occupancy would do to the payment. 60% wasn't ambitious. It was enough to service Sierra National and keep the property from becoming another line on the statement. The gas receipt shifted in the wind from the air vents. The address was written on the back in black ink. I drove north on I-80 with the gas receipt on the dash, doing storage unit math and not thinking about what Orion said about the lights. It took about 40 minutes to get out past Sparks and onto old US 40. The highway got emptier as I went. A closed Texaco with weeds around the pumps. A cinder block diner with plywood over the windows. A gravel lot where a car dealership had been, although there was still one faded signpost standing near the entrance. Starlight Lanes sat by itself beyond that. It was a low concrete rectangle with faded brick along the front and sides. No windows except the glass doors at the entrance. The building ran about 200 feet from one end to the other, which was more useful to me than anything else I saw. Square footage was square footage. The roof looked flat and the walls looked solid. Those were both good signs. The rooftop sign wasn't. A shooting star sat above the cursive words, Starlight Lanes. The neon tubing was dark and streaked with birdlime. Tumbleweed had collected against the glass front doors, pressed there by the wind. The parking lot was cracked in long black lines with dead grass growing through them. Near the outside wall by Lane 1, a dried-out juniper had pushed up through the asphalt and grown sideways. A 1997 Ford F-150 was parked near the entrance with the engine running. Orion Morgan sat behind the wheel. I parked beside him and got out. He was lean and old in the way some men get old without getting soft. Sun-leathered face, white hair cut close, canvas work shirt and jeans. He held the building keys in one hand. There were red marks across his palm from gripping them. He looked at my truck, then at me. Samuel? Orion? He nodded. That was the introduction. I glanced at the building. This is Starlight? Yes. How long has it been closed? He opened the truck door. Come on. That answered the question, as well as I was going to get. He walked to the front doors with the keys in his hand. I followed him across the lot, stepping over cracks and around the tumbleweed. The glass was dirty enough that I could see our reflections better than I could see inside. Orion unlocked the first door and pulled it open. The hinges made a long scraping sound. He held the door for me. Inside, the place smelled like dust, old carpet, and something sweet that had gone bad years ago. Rental shoes sat in wooden cubbies along the entry wall. Each pair had a lane number written on it in black marker. Plastic cups were lined up on the scoring tables with dried brown syrup rings inside them. There was a foil birthday banner over Lane 9. Happy Birthday Marcus was printed across it in silver letters. One end had come loose and hung lower than the other. Dust covered the foil so thickly that it looked gray. The fluorescents were off. The only light came through the glass doors behind us, and even that was fading. The score screens were dark. House balls sat in the returns where somebody had left them, coated in grime. I took a few steps inside. The building had been sitting untouched for 18 years, but it didn't feel empty in the usual way. Empty buildings lose things first. Paper gets carried out through broken windows. Metal gets stripped. Somebody takes the copper, then somebody else takes whatever's left. This place had kept all the cheap stuff. The shoes, the cups, the balls, the banner. That meant nobody had wanted to come back. I looked down the lanes. There were 24 of them, running in 2 long rows toward the far end of the building. The surfaces were dull with dust. Ball return tracks ran between them and disappeared into the darkness ahead. $48,000 was still $48,000. The land was worth more than 10 times that, and the building didn't have to stay a bowling alley. I could frame storage units down both sides, small units for contractors and people moving out of Reno, maybe larger bays near the front. The concrete walls were already in place. No windows meant fewer repairs. I was working through construction cost per square foot and monthly rent when Orion said, "Stay close." He started down the lanes. He moved fast for a man his age. Not running, just walking like stopping wasn't part of the plan. His eyes stayed forward. I had to shorten my steps to keep up. The light behind us changed while we walked. It had been orange when we came in. Now it was deep amber, reaching only a short distance across the floor. The rest of the alley had turned black. The alley closed in the summer of 1998, Orion said. He didn't slow down. Over a machine problem? I looked at him. What kind of machine? My brother Maurice ran it. He kept walking. Maurice didn't leave one night. The words sat there between us with the sound of our shoes on the floor. The county sealed the building after that. He didn't say what happened to Maurice. I didn't ask right away. The far end of the building was getting harder to see, and the arcade machines were somewhere over there in the dark. I could make out the shapes of them along the wall. Tall cabinets, black screens, dead controls. What kind of machine problem closes a business for 6 years? I said. Let alone 18. Stop asking questions. He put one hand against my chest and steered me back from the direction he was going. It wasn't hard, but it was, stay close. I am close. Then stay that way. He turned me toward the first lane. I looked past him at the ball return tracks. They ran the full length of all 24 lanes and vanished toward the arcade and whatever else was back there. The tracks were dirty. The scoring tables were dirty. The lanes were dirty. Dust lay over the cubbies and the banner and every flat surface in the building. I crouched beside lane 1. This was a normal part of an inspection. Check the slab. Look for cracks, settling, water damage, anything that would turn a cheap property into an expensive one. I ran my hand along the concrete near the approach and looked for a break in the floor. There were some hairline cracks. Nothing that changed the number. I looked up toward the pin deck. The pin setter mechanism sat above it in the dark. It was a Brunswick machine, or at least the parts of one I could see. The metal was clean, not wiped down clean, maintained clean. Oil showed along the moving joints. The sweep arm had no rust. The cable housing was intact. I stood up and looked down the row. The pin setter above lane 2 was clean too. So was the one above lane 3 and 4. All the way down the building, every mechanism looked the same. Spotless metal, oiled joints, no rust on the sweep arms, no dust packed into the cable housings. Everything below them had been left to rot. 18 years of grime covered the ball returns, the lane surfaces, the scoring tables, and the floor around our feet. The pin setters looked like somebody had serviced them that morning. I turned toward Orion. "The pin setters are clean," I said. "Everything else is filthy." He didn't look at the machines. They keep themselves. I was about to ask him what that meant when something moved at the far end of the building. The sound came first. A heavy mechanical clatter from somewhere behind lane 24, where the arcade had been. A sweep arm dropped with a hard metal bang. Then it rose again. There was a second clatter and the sound of pins hitting the deck. 10 pins. A full rack. I knew that sound. I'd spent enough time in bowling alleys to know what a Brunswick pin setter sounded like when it was working right. The sweep arm dropped, the pins settled, the machine reset itself for the next ball, except the building had been closed for 18 years. I stayed crouched beside lane 1 and looked down the alley. Orion had the mag light in his hand. He turned it toward the far end, but the beam only reached a short way across the floor before the dark swallowed it. "That could be a short?" I said. Orion didn't answer. I kept watching the end of lane 24. The idea made sense if I gave it enough room. Old wiring, a bad connection, something left tied into the electrical system that had finally decided to work. It didn't explain the clean pin setters or the sound of pins dropping into place. But buildings did strange things when they sat long enough. Pipes knocked, motors started, a transformer failed and came back. The pin deck light above lane 24 flickered on. It was the only light in the building. A small yellow circle over the pin deck, with the rest of the lane disappearing into blackness. The pins stood in their fresh rack under it. 10 white shapes lined up at the far end. I looked at Orion. "Is the power connected?" He had gone pale, not scared. Orion didn't show things that way. He looked like a man watching a number come up on a calculator and finding out he'd put the wrong figure in at the beginning. He lowered the mag light. The beam slid across the floor and stopped beneath the ball return track beside us. Something long and dark moved under it. I saw the shape bend as it passed through the light. There was a wet scrape against the metal, slow and heavy, like something being pulled through a narrow space. Then it was gone. Orion grabbed my arm. "We have to go. Now." He pulled me upright before I could ask anything else. His hand was hard around my sleeve. I caught myself against the scoring table and started after him. We moved back toward the front doors. Orion walked fast and I had to match him, stepping around the ball returns and the cracks in the approach. The light behind us was still out, except for that one pin deck at the far end. I could hear something moving down there. Not the machines. This was lower and slower, with metal scraping against metal. The entry doors were ahead of us. The glass showed a strip of darkening sky and the parking lot beyond it. The last daylight was fading fast. There was no time left in the afternoon. We were almost to the lobby when the sun dropped below the horizon. Every pin deck light came on. They started at lane 24 and ran toward us in order. One light, then the next, then the next. Each one showed a fresh rack of 10 pins waiting at the end of the lane. The lights continued down both rows until all 24 lanes were lit. The fluorescence kicked on at the same time. Every tube in the building came alive with a flat white glare. The dust on the lanes showed up. So did the cracked floor and the dirty scoring tables and the birthday banner over lane 9. The place looked less abandoned under the lights, but it didn't look occupied either. It looked switched on. The pin setters began cycling, not together. The machine at lane 24 started first, then another somewhere behind it. A sweep arm dropped, another one rose, a rack slammed into place. Then 3 machines started at once farther down the alley. The sound rolled toward us in pieces. Metal clanging, cables pulling tight, hydraulic systems hissing, sweep arms dropping and rising again. The machines were out of sequence, but the gaps between them kept getting smaller until the clatter became one continuous roar. Orion reached the doors first. He pushed the right-hand door open. It moved about 6 inches and stopped. He shoved it again. The glass rattled in the frame. I came up beside him and saw the chain through the glass. It was a heavy logging chain threaded through the exterior push bars, links thick enough to take both hands to break. A padlock hung in the middle of it. Neither of us had touched a chain when we came inside. The doors had opened normally. Orion had unlocked them and held one open for me. Now the chain was on the outside. I looked through the gap into the parking lot. The lot was empty. The dead grass along the cracks didn't move. There was no truck, no person, no shadow crossing the building, just the dark lot and the road beyond it. The machines behind us did not stop. I stared at the padlocked logging chain through the glass doors while 24 pin setters cycled and roared behind me, and no one was visible in the empty parking lot outside. Orion pulled me away from the doors and back toward the shoe counter. It was a long wooden counter near the entrance with a clear view of the doors and almost the entire alley. The only place in the building where we could see both ways. He ducked behind it and set the keys down beside the cash register. Then he pulled a mag light from inside his work shirt. I looked at the flashlight. "You had that the whole time?" "Yes." He took out a cell phone and checked it. The screen showed no signal. He turned it once in his hand and checked again. "Nearest tower's back near I-80, he said. "Concrete kills what reaches this far." The machines kept running behind us. Sweep arms dropped and came back up. Pins rattled into place. Hydraulic lines hissed. Every time a cycle finished, another one started somewhere farther down the alley. Nothing moved on the ball returns. I watched the tracks between the lanes. They ran toward the dark end and came back to us through the machines. But there was nothing in them. No ball, no hand, no shape sliding through the metal. Orion crouched beside me with the mag light across his knees. "You said your brother ran this place." "Yes." "What happened to him?" He kept looking toward the lanes. "Maurice was a mechanic. Took over in 1991. He rebuilt the pin setters." "All of them?" "All 24. The sound rolled over us. One sweep arm, then another. The machines didn't work together. They worked in a ragged sequence that covered the gaps before the silence could settle. He spent years on them," Orion said. "Changed the drive systems. Made them run a complete reset without a person. Autonomous. Yes. Why? He called it his life's work." That sounded like the kind of answer Maurice would have given if I'd asked him myself. Not why he built it, what it did. Orion rubbed his thumb over the edge of the mag light. He made it respond to a standing rack. 10 pins in place and the machine reset. No ball needed, no operator. That doesn't explain the price. No. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Dust showed on every surface below the machines. The pin setters stayed clean. Orion looked toward lane 24. It happened on a Tuesday night, late July, 1998. He said the date like he was reading it off a report. Maurice closed up and went into the mechanics pit behind lane 24. The drive systems are under there. Hydraulic lines, access from the back. He stopped. I waited. "Adjustment," he said. He went in to make an adjustment. And didn't come out. No. The machine cycled. Sweep, lift, rack. The same process repeated without a ball ever touching the lanes. Next morning, the building was locked. I opened it. He looked at me then. His face had gone flat. The machines were running. His boots were at the edge of the pit. There was blood on the concrete. "How much?" He didn't answer right away. "Enough." Was he in the pit? His body wasn't there. "Did they find it?" "No." The word came out clean. No pause around it. The county called it an industrial accident with an unrecovered victim. Maurice's body was never found. Orion had come into the building the next morning and found the boots and the blood and the machines running. That was the whole record, as far as I could tell. What happened after that? They run at dusk. Every night? Every night since July of 1998. All 24? Yes. They stop. At dawn. The machines kept working while he said it. They reset racks that nobody had knocked down and prepared lanes that nobody was using. The business had been closed for 6 years. The equipment had been running every night anyway. I looked at the front doors. The chain was still outside. The padlock hung through the glass where I could see it. How many people have been in here after dark? Orion's eyes stayed on the alley. Buyers come in the daytime. Some stay past dusk. And then? They don't leave. He didn't say how many. He didn't give me a number. That was the part I wanted most, and he knew it. That's why the price is $48,000, he said. I looked back at the lanes. Land alone was worth $500,000. That number had been doing most of my thinking for me since I saw the listing. Now it had to compete with the blood on the concrete and the buyers who stayed until the doors chained themselves. Why didn't you tell me before we came inside? He didn't answer. Orion. People don't buy a building they understand. That was the closest he came to admitting the mistake. The machines kept cycling. The sound had become one long mechanical operation, with individual impacts appearing inside it like loose parts in a dryer. I could feel the vibration through the counter. How do we stop them? Breaker rooms at the far end. He pointed with the mag light toward the dark beyond the arcade. Past the arcade, beside the pit. The main breaker? Yes. If we cut it, they stop. Yes. The answer came too quickly. I looked at the black end of the alley. The overhead fluorescence reached only so far. Past the midpoint, the light got thin. The ball returns cast long shadows across the approaches. You've never done that? I've never gone back after dark. Then how do you know it works? He stood up. I know the layout. That's not what I asked. We need the breaker. He took the mag light in his right hand. The phone stayed on the counter beside the register, its screen still showing no signal. I'll go, he said. I know the layout. I wasn't going to ask him to take me with him because I already knew what the answer would be. The counter was the only position with a clear sight line to the doors and the lanes, and I had no interest in putting more concrete between myself and the exit. If the breaker worked, Orion could cut the power and we could get outside. If it didn't, I would still have a few seconds to see what came back. How long? He looked at me. Stay here. That wasn't a length of time. He moved along the right wall, past the shoe cubbies and the rows of numbered shoes. The maglite beam swung over the floor ahead of him. It caught the edge of the birthday banner above lane 9, turning the silver letters gray, then slid away. Orion passed lane 9, then the midpoint of the alley. The shadows from the ball return tracks got deeper as he went. His light moved across the concrete in a narrow white circle. The machines continued cycling around him. I watched his boots until the fluorescence thinned and the dark took them. His footsteps carried back along the approaches. Slow and even. Concrete under work boots. One step, then another. He passed the last lit lane. The footsteps stopped. For several seconds, there was only the machines. Then something screeched at the far end. It wasn't a pin setter sound. It wasn't a cable pulling tight or a sweep arm dropping. It sounded like metal being torn apart, or something being pulled open that had been closed for a long time. Orion made a short sound. The maglite struck the concrete. Its beam rolled across the floor and stopped against the base of the far wall. The pin setter at lane 24 cycled once. Cleanly, The sweep arm dropped, lifted, and reset a full rack of 10 pins. The mag light stayed on the floor. Orion did not speak again. The mag light rolled across the concrete and came to rest about 10 feet from the shoe counter. I could hear it turning slowly on its side, the beam flashing over the floor each time it made a full rotation. The machines kept cycling behind me. Then something started coming up the lanes. It wasn't footsteps. It was a dragging scrape with a ratcheting sound underneath it, like a sweep arm moving over metal. The ball return track along the right side of the alley groaned under the weight. Something wet dragged along with it, heavy, slow. The sound came closer. The fluorescence began strobing lane by lane. One light flashed on above lane 24, then went dark. The next light came on farther down, then another. Whatever was moving passed beneath each one and took the light with it. I stayed behind the counter as long as I could. The machines were still running. The front doors were still chained. Orion was still somewhere near the breaker room with the mag light, unless the thing had already taken him. The scrape came closer. I dropped to my hands and knees and went for the flashlight. I didn't stand up all the way. There wasn't enough room in my head for balance and speed at the same time. So I kept low and crossed the floor on one hand while reaching with the other. The mag light stopped turning when I grabbed it. I rolled onto my side and aimed the beam down the alley. The thing was under the lights. It wasn't Orion. It wasn't a machine in any conventional sense either, although most of it had started that way. There was a human torso in the middle of it. The chest had been opened and hollowed out. Hydraulic lines ran through the cavity in loops and bundles, disappearing into the shoulders and lower frame. The arms were Brunswick sweep arms, the long steel paddles that cleared fallen pins from the lane. They were attached at the shoulders with cable and hydraulic fittings. The hands had been replaced with pin gripper claws. The claws opened and closed as it moved. One sweep arm hooked over the ball return track and pulled. The other reached forward and caught the metal ahead of it. The torso dragged behind them. Oil shone under the fluorescent flashes. That was why the pin setters were clean. The thing had been servicing itself. It reached lane 1 and stopped at the edge of the approach. One claw came over the track. The steel fingers opened beside me. I tried to get backward. My right leg was still under the counter. The claw closed around my calf. The pressure went through the boot immediately. The leather folded in and the steel kept closing. I felt the grip in the muscle first, then deeper. The machine had been designed to lift a 10-pin, 3.5 pounds. That was what the gripper was supposed to handle. Somebody had modified it. The claw pulled. My boots scraped across the approach. The ball return track groaned as the thing dragged more of itself forward. I grabbed the edge of the counter with one hand and the mag light with the other. It was going to set me. That was what the machine did with the standing rack. It picked up the pins and placed them. The thing didn't need a ball. It didn't need an operator. It had been built to find a rack and reset it. I was the rack. The claw retracted another few inches. My leg bent under the pressure. I swung the mag light at the center of the assembly. The aluminum casing hit the vertical spindle with a hard metallic crack. The casing bent around it. The spindle didn't. The hydraulic line running toward the gripper arm jumped and twisted. There was a sudden hiss. The pressure dropped. The claw opened. I fell backward onto the approach. For a second, I looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent tubes flickered above me. The machines kept working. Sweep, lift, rack. Then I looked at my leg. The boot was destroyed from the middle of the calf down. The leather had split open, and the steel toe was bent sideways. Blood ran into the grooves in the approach. I could move the leg, but the front of the foot wasn't right. The toes and the arch had been crushed into a shape that didn't belong to me anymore. The thing was turning. Its sweep arms ground against the ball return track, while the hydraulic lines hissed and tightened. It shifted its weight toward me. The claw that had grabbed my leg opened once and closed again. I got onto my forearms and started moving. The front doors were chained. The only other exit I'd seen was behind the arcade at the far end of the building. That was where Orion had told me not to go. It was also the only direction left. I pulled myself forward with both arms. My right leg dragged behind me. Blood marked the approach at lane 1 and lane 2. The floor was cold through my shirt. Every few feet I had to stop and catch my breath, then start again before the thing reached me. The machine cycled overhead. A sweep arm dropped above lane 3. Another one came down above lane 4. Pins rattled into place. The sound followed me down the alley. I passed lane 9 without looking up at the birthday banner. I knew it was there. The silver letters had been hanging over the lane when we came in. Happy birthday, Marcus. I kept my eyes on the dark ahead and pulled myself past it. The thing dragged behind me along the ball return track. The track groaned under its weight. Metal scraped over metal. Every time I heard the claw close, I moved faster, even though faster wasn't much faster. My elbows slipped on the floor. My left knee caught on a crack in the concrete. I kept going. The arcade section appeared in pieces. Dead cabinets lined the wall with their screens black and dusty. A change machine stood beside them. The claw crane still held stuffed animals inside, pressed against the glass as if somebody might come back and win one. Behind the last lane was the mechanic's pit. The steel grate had been pushed aside. The opening went down into the concrete floor, black under the lights. I saw enough of it to know where Orion had gone. I didn't look into the pit. The fire exit was on the exterior wall to my left. A faded sign hung above it. The letters were barely visible in the dead red plastic. I reached the door and hit the crash bar with both hands. It opened. I went through sideways and fell onto the asphalt. The parking lot was completely dark. The air outside felt cold against the sweat on my face. I listened for the thing behind me. Nothing followed through the door. I dragged myself across the lot toward the Silverado. The cracked asphalt cut into my hands. My right foot dragged behind me and left a dark line across the dust. The truck was where I'd left it near the front entrance, with the property sheet and the gas receipt still on the dashboard. I reached the driver's door and used the handle to pull myself upright. My leg didn't hold me. I got the door open, fell into the seat, and pulled the door shut. The keys were in my pocket. I started the truck and drove one-footed, left foot only. I kept the right leg lifted as much as I could and worked the pedals with the other one. I went east on Old US 40, then reached I-80 and turned south toward Sparks. The road came in and out of focus. I kept both hands on the wheel and watched the lines. There wasn't much traffic. A few headlights passed going the other way. The Silverado shook over the rough sections of pavement. I drove to Reno Regional Medical Center on Mill Street in Reno. At intake, I told them it was an industrial accident at a property I was inspecting. A piece of equipment had fallen on my foot. The woman behind the desk looked at the boot and called for help. I didn't mention Orion. I didn't mention Starlight Lanes. I didn't mention the machine in the pit. The emergency team worked on my right foot for 4 hours. They kept the leg. The second, third, and fourth toes were gone, along with part of the arch that was too damaged to reconstruct. After that, I lay in a hospital bed at Reno Regional with my right foot wrapped and 3 toes gone, and I didn't tell anyone what happened inside Starlight Lanes. By morning, I was still at Reno Regional with my right foot wrapped and 3 toes gone. Orion's daughter reported him missing when he didn't come home. The Washoe County Sheriff's Office opened a missing persons case and listed Starlight Lanes as his last known location. Deputies went out the following morning and found the logging chain still threaded through the front doors. The padlock was on the outside. They didn't go in. That was enough to leave the building standing and Orion missing. Nobody found him in the parking lot or along the road. Nobody found him in the mechanic's pit. The case stayed open, which sounds better than saying nothing happened. Orion Morgan was never found. Within 2 weeks, the county assessor's office removed Starlight Lanes from the commercial property sheet. There was no explanation in the public file. The property stayed in the Morgan estate without being transferred. Taxes went unpaid. Liens accumulated. The building remained where it was, which was the only part of the situation that seemed to follow a normal process. I spent the next few months recovering at my apartment in Reno. The doctors kept the leg. They couldn't keep the foot in its original condition, but they kept enough of it to make walking possible. The arch collapsed. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th toes were gone. I learned how to use a cane and stopped wearing the right boot until I had to. I didn't flip any more properties. Sierra National put the line of credit into default. I didn't contest it. There wasn't much point in arguing over numbers when the numbers were already settled. The warehouse was still empty. The strip mall still hadn't moved. Starlight Lanes was no longer on the sheet, but it had taken the rest of the deal with it anyway. I told no one what happened inside the building, not the doctors, not the sheriff's office, not the bank. I described it as an industrial accident at a property I was inspecting. A piece of equipment had fallen on my foot. That was close enough to the truth for paperwork. Years passed. I don't say exactly how many because I stopped keeping track of Starlight Lanes as a property and started keeping track of it as a place I had survived. Those are different categories. A property can be sold. A place like that stays where it was. One early evening, I drove out on old US 40 past Sparks and parked across the road from the building. The parking lot had grown over further. Grass and weeds filled the cracks in the asphalt. The tumbleweed against the front doors was thicker than before, pressed into the glass by years of wind. The faded brick had gone almost gray. The rooftop sign was still there. The shooting star above the cursive words Starlight Lanes had lost more of its tubing, but the shape remained. The building was still standing. I parked with the engine off and watched the light change over the roof. The road behind me carried a few trucks toward Sparks. Their headlights came on as the sky darkened, then moved away. Across from me, the front doors stayed black behind the chain. There was no reason for the sign to work. No power company had serviced the building since 1998. The county file showed that. The public records showed a property with unpaid taxes and accumulating liens. They did not show a working sign. At dusk, the shooting star lit up. The light came on above the roof in a thin yellow line. Then the cursive letters followed one section at a time. Starlight Lanes glowed against the dark building. The shooting star moved through its old animation sequence, arcing above the letters and disappearing at the far end before starting again. I watched it for about 4 minutes. The sign went dark when the sequence finished. The roof returned to its usual shape. Concrete, brick, dead glass. Nothing that would make somebody stop on the highway and look twice. I started the truck and turned back toward Reno. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel anything that useful. The sign had lit and gone dark. That was information, The building was still operating on whatever system Maurice had put into it, and the system had no reason to care whether the county had removed the listing, or whether Orion had a daughter waiting at home, or whether I had learned to walk with a cane. It would keep doing what it had been built to do. I drove east with the headlights on, and the road opening ahead of me. Starlight Lanes disappeared in the side mirror. The shooting star was gone. The letters were gone. Across the road, there was only the dark shape of the building and the empty lot around it. Inside the building, 24 machines were resetting racks for a game that would never be played. And they would do it again tomorrow night. Because Maurice Morgan built them to run without anyone.